I woke up with a thick plastic tube down my throat and a fire burning through my spine. The 9-hour surgery was over, but the real nightmare began the second my fingers stopped shaking enough to unlock my phone. I had 17 missed calls from my father. "No, I love you." "No, did you survive?" Just a single, cold voicemail. When I pressed play, his voice boomed through my hospital room. "Genevieve, we couldn't wait for you to wake up. The market shifted, so we sold your condo today to pay your brother's legal fees. You need to vacate by Friday." My blood ran ice cold. They didn't just sell the home I bought with my own hard-earned money while I was paralyzed on an operating table. They did it using a forged power of attorney. They thought a disabled woman couldn't fight back. They were dead wrong. My name is Genevieve. For the last 10 years, I've poured every ounce of my energy into building a reputation as a meticulous interior architect. I didn't rely on inheritance, family favors, or luck. I spent endless nights staring at blueprints until my eyes bled, eventually earning enough to purchase my absolute sanctuary, a beautiful, sunlit condo overlooking the Seattle waterfront. It was my pride, my proof that I had made it. But while I was building a life, my father, Garrick, was busy funding a black hole. That black hole was my younger brother, Lachlan. Coddled from birth, Lachlan was a financial parasite wrapped in an expensive haircut. Every failed startup, every reckless investment, and every legal mess he created was quietly swept under the rug by our father, using whatever money the family had left. I had long since distanced myself from their toxic cycle, refusing to let Lachlan bleed me dry too. Then, my world shifted. A routine checkup for chronic back pain revealed a severe spinal compression. The doctor looked at me with immense gravity and said if I didn't undergo an immediate, 9-hour surgical reconstruction, I risked permanent paralysis. The night before I was wheeled into the operating room, Garrick showed up at my apartment. He didn't bring comfort, he brought paperwork. He insisted that while I was incapacitated under heavy anesthesia, he needed to manage my affairs and handle the hospital billing. Distracted by terror and the looming shadow of a major disability, I didn't question his sudden wave of fatherly concern. I signed the forms, believing a father wouldn't betray his own blood. I was wrong. The ice-hard venom in my father's recorded voice completely shattered the heavy fog of the post-surgery narcotics. I lay frozen in the sterile recovery room, the rhythmic electronic beep of the heart monitor spiking rapidly as panic flooded my veins. With trembling fingers and tears of pure frustration blurring my vision, I dialed Garrick's number. He answered on the second ring, his tone chillingly defensive, devoid of any paternal warmth or concern for whether I had survived the delicate procedure. "How could you do this?" I croaked out, my throat raw and bleeding from the surgical intubation tube. "You sold my home while I was under the knife." Garrick didn't flinch. He told me that family loyalty demanded sacrifices, and that Lachlan's immediate freedom was vastly more important than some piece of real estate. My brother had been arrested the previous night on massive corporate fraud charges, and the court demanded an astronomical cash bail alongside a steep attorney retainer. Garrick had run out of funds weeks ago. That was when the sickening realization hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't used the hospital billing paperwork I signed the night before. Instead, Garrick had dug up an old, temporary medical power of attorney from an auto accident years ago. He and Lachlan had crudely altered the expiration dates, completely bypassing legal verification to trick an expedited cash buyer title company. They deliberately waited until they knew I would be completely unconscious and defenseless, systematically stripping away the most valuable asset I owned to save a criminal who had never earned a dime. The raw fury burning inside me completely overrode the agonizing pain in my back. Against the frantic protests of my nursing team, I demanded an immediate discharge, signing the hospital's liability waiver with shaking hands. Less than 24 hours after a massive spinal reconstruction, I was sitting in the front seat of an accessible taxi, my surgical scars weeping against the headrest as we sped toward my waterfront sanctuary. When the car pulled up to the curb, my heart completely shattered. A commercial locksmith van was parked in the driveway, its side doors thrown wide open. On the sidewalk stood my father, Garrick, casually holding open a heavy-duty trash bag. He was ruthlessly throwing my hand-drawn architectural sketches, my framed degrees, and my personal photo albums directly into the garbage like worthless debris. I forced myself out of the taxi, gripping my walker with white-knuckled intensity as I dragged my semi-paralyzed legs across the pavement. "Stop touching my things," I screamed, my voice cracking with absolute rage. Garrick didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He turned to me, his eyes cold and entirely transactional. He scoffed, telling me that I was being incredibly selfish for crying over bricks and mortar when my own brother's entire future was hanging by a thread. He coldly reminded me that I had high-end medical insurance to cover my needs, while Lachlan had nothing. With a final dismissive glare, he signaled the locksmith to lock the new deadbolts. They rolled my belongings onto the concrete and drove away, leaving a disabled woman stranded on the sidewalk. Stranded on the concrete, I called the one person I knew I could trust. Vance, a sharp, no-nonsense corporate attorney who had helped me review my business contracts for years. Within 20 minutes, he arrived, wrapped me in a heavy coat, and safely moved me into a temporary extended-stay suite. While I lay flat on my back, letting the intense throbbing in my spine subside, Vance opened his laptop and began aggressively digging into the expedited sale of my property. A few hours later, he sat down at the edge of my bed, his face grim and tight. The situation was far uglier than we had initially feared. Garrick and Lachlan hadn't just rushed the sale of my condo to an off-market cash buyer. They had also gained unauthorized access to my corporate banking credentials. They completely drained my interior architecture firm's capital reserves, wiping out months of client deposits and effectively leaving my business bankrupt before the morning sun even hit the harbor. But as Vance traced the rapid digital paper trail of the property transfer, his eyes suddenly lit up with a dangerous spark. He uncovered a massive, fatal loophole in their desperate plan. The specific boutique title company they used to rush the closing documents through didn't just overlook the obviously forged dates on the old power of attorney by accident. The firm was owned and operated by a notorious college fraternity friend of Lachlan's, a man already under investigation for helping sketchy developers flip compromised properties. By deliberately using a corrupt insider to force the sale through while I was incapacitated, my father and brother hadn't just committed a civil violation. They had crossed directly into high-level federal territory. Every primitive instinct in my body screamed at me to launch a direct attack, to call the police immediately, and to rain hell down on their heads. But Vance stopped me. He looked at me with absolute certainty and said, "If you strike now, they will find a loophole, hide the cash, and blame the title company. Let them think they got away with it." I took a deep, agonizing breath and forced my rage to turn cold. Instead of confronting them, I chose to play the role of the broken, defeated victim. I waited until evening before dialing Garrick's number. When he answered, I didn't scream. I forced my voice to crack, letting artificial tears choke my words as I told him that I was too exhausted and weak from the spinal surgery to fight them anymore. I whispered that I accepted the loss of the condo for the sake of the family name. Then, I casually mentioned that I heard they were hosting a private, freedom celebration dinner for Lachlan the following night at an upscale steakhouse downtown. I asked if I could roll my wheelchair in, just to see my brother one last time before I packed up what was left of my life. Believing they had successfully broken my spirit and completely neutralized any legal threat, Garrick actually chuckled, praising me for finally acting like a loyal daughter. The trap was set. While my father and brother spent the next 24 hours arrogantly raising their glasses to their easy victory, Vance was quietly working behind the scenes. He compiled every byte of metadata, the forensic evidence of the forged signatures, the fraudulent bank transfers, and the title company's collusion into an airtight federal packet. They thought I was arriving at that dinner to beg for mercy. They had no idea they were walking into an execution. The mahogany-paneled private dining room at the steakhouse smelled of expensive cigars and aged scotch. As I rolled my wheelchair through the double doors, the laughter abruptly died. Garrick was standing at the head of the table, a crystal glass raised high, while Lachlan sat beside him, grinning with the insufferable arrogance of a man who believed he was entirely untouchable. Bianca, Lachlan's fiancée, was admiring a flashing new diamond ring on her finger, no doubt purchased with the stolen equity of my home. Genevieve, Garrick said, his voice booming with synthetic warmth as he gestured toward an empty space at the table. You made it. We were just celebrating the dismissal of Lachlan's initial charges. Family always wins. I didn't smile, and I didn't take a seat. Instead, I rolled directly up to my brother, my spine stiff and unyielding despite the pulsing ache beneath my bandages. It certainly does, I said quietly. With a calm, deliberate motion, I reached into my bag and slid a thick manila folder across the pristine white tablecloth, knocking over Lachlan's wine glass. Dark red liquid spread like blood across the fabric. Lachlan frowned, opening the folder carelessly. But as his eyes scanned the top page, his smirk completely vanished. The color drained from his face so fast he looked ghost white. It wasn't a letter of forgiveness. It was a certified copy of a federal criminal indictment for grand larceny, wire fraud, and identity theft, accompanied by an emergency asset freeze order signed by a judge just 2 hours prior. What is this? Garrick demanded, snatching the papers. Before he could process the text, the heavy doors opened again. Detective Sloan stepped into the room, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Because the title company's collusion had been exposed, the bail money they deposited was officially flagged as tainted proceeds of a crime. Right there, in front of the entire restaurant, Sloan revoked Lachlan's bail on the spot. The handcuffs clicked tightly around my brother's wrists, shattering their perfect celebration into absolute ruin. The fallout from that evening was swift and absolute. Because the title company's blatant collusion was laid bare in Vance's airtight filing, the fraudulent sale of my waterfront condo was legally voided within weeks. I was able to return to my sanctuary, watching the morning sun hit the harbor from my own living room as my spine steadily healed. My father's desperate attempts to shield his favorite child ultimately sealed his own ruin. Garrick was forced into a sudden, humiliating early retirement, liquidating his own remaining assets just to cover the massive legal defense fees for a case he had already lost. Lachlan's bravado completely evaporated when the judge sentenced him to a lengthy term in a federal penitentiary for grand larceny and corporate fraud. Without my home equity to fund their illusions, their fragile house of cards completely collapsed. They tried to break me while I was at my most vulnerable, but they only succeeded in showing me exactly how strong I could be when pushed to the edge. What would you have done if you woke up to that voicemail? Would you have fought back, or walked away? Comment below and let me know your thoughts.